I'm Michael Croker, and this is the Park Life Podcast. Ralph Cohen has had an amazing life on and off stage. His many years within Village Roadshow theme parks is only part of the story. We jump around a little here in an attempt to capture as much as we could in the time that we had. At one point, early in our chat, we referenced the comedic actor MARY COUSTAS, though at the time could not recall her name. I wanted to be sure to correct that here in the intro. A colourful life led by an equally colourful character. Settle in and get to know Ralph Cohen. Ralph, thanks for joining me today here on Park Life. Good to see you.
Nice to see you too, Michael.
I've been wanting to do this with you for a little while because I know from a distance that your story is pretty amazing. And I do want to dig back into your journey before theme parks. But if we were just to begin, you're currently with Village Roadshow Theme Parks based at Warner Brothers Movie World. How long have you been in the theme park business?
Well, I've been working here for just on 19 years, nearly 20. However, I was here on opening day.
And what year was that?
Oh, you know that better than me.
That was 30 years ago, right?
30 plus, yeah. I
30
was
plus.
driving limos. And the company I was with, Gold Coast Limos, gave me a big stretch and said, go to Brisbane and pick up these television stars. It was Effie and all of her mob, and bring them down.
We should say, for those that don't know, the character of Effie, and I can't recall the actress' name, was part of the comedy scene.
A comedy Greek show, yeah.
Yes, back in the 90s. It was a very big... Yeah. There's a comedy, Australian television had a real glory period there with comedy, and she was part of that.
Yeah.
I will make sure I get the name and put it
I'll
in the notes.
The name eventually.
So you're picking up some celebs of the time
in
the
had
limo.
To bring them down here.
Mm-hmm.
And then I sat in the car park for 5 hours along with some other limo drivers, and we saw Clint Eastwood arrive and Goldie Hawn, but I never actually came in the door. So, but I can say at least I was here opening day.
And that was, I think it was also, Clint, Goldie and Kurt Russell, who married to Goldie,
yes,
of course.
I think he was there too.
Yeah. And so that would have been a lot of hustle and bustle. You're in the car park and that's all happening on opening day.
Yeah. Oh yeah, a lot of people.
How do you go from sitting in the car park watching the opening day of Movie World happen on the Gold Coast in Australia, obviously where we are? How do you go from that to eventually finding yourself working in the parks?
Well, most of my adult life, I've been in food and beverage or entertainment or both. And it got to the stage after I was driving limos for a while, I was still doing the odd show, comedy show, stand-up, that I just decided, okay, you guys were advertising for staff, I'll come out here. And it was quite funny because when I did my interview here to get a job, the girl interviewing me was probably 19 or 20. And she said, when did you first hear about Movie World, Mr. Cohen? And I said, I was here opening day. Were you? She couldn't believe that.
Yeah.
So that was funny. So I started here in food and beverage and never done any shows per se here in the parks, but then they sent me to SeaWorld, and I was in food and beverage over there for a while. Then they sent me from SeaWorld back here. Then from here they sent me to Paradise Country, and that was the original Paradise Country at Nerang.
Yes.
And I was there for a month or two. Then they brought me back here, and then they put me in the new Paradise Country when it reopened up the back here. And then back here, one day, a number of years ago now, I forget the date, one of the staff ladies came to me and said, we've got this Midway Games area. Would you like to work up there? I said, I've done all that. She said, when? I said, when I was 14 and 15. She said, what? I said, I had a cousin in New Zealand that used to work for a showman that did all these sideshows and sideshow games. And I said, I was 13, 14, 15 working in the games. Oh my goodness me. So they took me from food and beverage, put me in Midway Games. I ended up running it for a few years. Had a lot of fun, and just totally off the point for a moment, one of the memories I have of Midway Games, the horse race game where you roll a ball and it makes the horse go forward, I can still see Shane Warne sitting in the corner of that game with his two kids for about an hour playing the game. We had a lot of fun talking.
That's fantastic. Of course, we're recording this only days after Shane's passing and only days before a state funeral. So that's an amazing clear memory for you too, yeah?
It is, yeah.
You obviously enjoy people because of all that movement across parks and your entertainment background, which I want to get into in a moment. Is that part of the attraction for you working in this business, is the love of people?
Definitely. Having fun with children, making them smile. Adults as well, because I used to be a stand-up comic, so that was part of the job, wasn't it? Making them smile. But I do have a lot of fun with kids and families. And one of the ladies who works here now, Audra, said to me recently, she gets so many people saying to her, "Where's Ralph?" on the days that I don't work in the shop opposite the shop she works in. Because she said, and I've even had people come to me and say, "My God, you're still here. What are you doing here?" But I enjoy it. And I'm of the age where I could retire, but I don't want to, because I enjoy coming to work for a few hours. I only work 3 days a week, and I get to meet a lot of new people, as well as the people I work with. And sometimes some of the young ones are smart enough to ask me what I do, what should I do. There was one young fella here for a number of years in Midway Games, and he used to call me his mentor. And to me, that was really, really exciting that somebody would want me to mentor them.
And is that because he found your energy and your engagement with customers consistently was kind of infectious?
I think so.
Yeah.
And he said, "You've always know what to say and when to say it." And I said to him, "Well, you being young, there's a lot of things I say you can't say, but you can learn from what I'm doing. You can learn how to go in a direction. You can learn how to make them play again, spend another $5 or whatever, without them not realising, but without them thinking, oh, it's more money down the drain, you know." And so I've always had, my parents even used to say, I had the gift of the gab, which is why I ended up getting into stand-up comedy way back in 1963.
That's a good segue. Were you an only child?
No, I have an older brother.
Right.
But he's 92. He's 14 years older than me.
And did he have a similar leaning into the
Not
industry?
at all. Not at all.
Okay.
My parents were Scots, Scots-Jewish. They came to New Zealand in 1939 to get away from the war and your friend Hitler and everybody. My brother was 9 years old at the time. He's now 92 and he's still got a Scottish accent.
Wow.
But no, he was an apprentice shoemaker, bootmaker, leather worker, and he finished his time in that. And so he was a tradesperson. But he thinks he's funnier than me, or was, but he really, it was a different thing. I took comedy very seriously.
Yes, that sounds like an odd thing, right? But it is a craft and it is an art. Can we go back in time? Who inspired you in terms of comedy? What were you listening to?
Well, back in those days, it was very different to today. First of all, television had not even started in Australia and New Zealand. And the only comedy you got was on records, LP records, on the radio, and on stage. And about 1962-3, I was working in a coffee bar, washing dishes actually, and the guy that was the cook, he was a singer, and I was a trainee, if you like, comedian. And I thought, now, can I sing as good as he can? And I thought, not quite, but there's very few comedians in New Zealand. So let's give that a try. People keep saying I've got a big mouth, I talk too much, but I do have the ability to make them laugh a lot. So I got involved.
Yeah.
Now, I have a collection of comedy books, about 100 books and about 60 LPs at home that were all from that era. And the big thing in that era was you could not swear. You could not even say the word bloody or shit on stage. The F word was totally out of it. This is 1962-3. So I had not real lessons, but 1963 I did my first tour, the South Island of New Zealand. And there was people on the show, Bill and Boyd, you'd probably have heard of them, Max Merritt and the Meteors, you might have heard of them. The others you wouldn't have heard of, they were Kiwi acts. Peter Poser, brilliant guitar player, blah, blah, blah. And there was a country and western singer called Rusty Greaves. his sons and daughters now are quite popular in New Zealand. Anyway, Rusty taught me a lot because he did gags as well. And he taught me lots of little things about how if you get 1 or 2 laughs with your first joke, don't be upset because you can build on it. If you get no laughs with your first joke, be upset and get off the bloody stage.
Anyway. Not meaning to cut your flow, but is this were you coming out of an era of the classic, almost vaudevillian era, the song and dance man, the stand-up comic? Were you drawing on influences? I'm just keen to know where that fire in your belly came from.
Well, I was able to make people laugh. I was Jewish. 70-80% of the American comedians at that time were Jewish.
Yeah.
Some of the English ones, mostly American. Now, I enjoyed the American comedy, and I used to listen to it on the albums and copy it and so on and so on. In fact, when I went to Sydney in 1969, I think, there was an article, I've still got it at home in a scrapbook, where I think one of the Sunday papers, and the bloke said, "This kid is very good. He does English comedy, American style."
What a great compliment.
It was. Yeah. And in '69, when I'll get to it in a moment.
Yeah. I want to take you back. I'm going to just jump in and take you back because we were in 1962. 62, 63, and you're in New Zealand.
Yep.
You're on stage, and these shows are touring shows that are a mix of contemporary music, stand-up comedy. Is it like a
comedy,
a showcase?
Music, country and western singer.
Right.
There was a trio on it that was very famous
Yep.
in New Zealand that were like the Kingston Trio, but that wasn't them, of course. And one of the funny things from the show, the second night or third night, the promoter, a guy called Graham Dent, called me into his hotel room before the show. And I thought I was in trouble, but he wanted to tell me how well I was doing. And he said, "Have a drink," and he gave me a whiskey. And I didn't drink much. Anyway, 2 whiskeys on an empty stomach. I then go to the theatre. I come out on stage, and I can't remember what I'm supposed to be doing.
Oh, no.
Luckily for me, Max Merritt, the Meteors, Max was behind me, and I turned around and said, "Max, what the hell is my first joke?" And he said, "The one about so-and-so." I said, "Oh." So Max then told me the act, and I just kept doing the gags till I sobered up. From that day to this, I have never had a drink before I go on stage.
Yeah.
Ever.
That you just kept that discipline.
Lessons learned.
Was that a golden period? This period of you were honing your craft and touring?
Yes. I did a number of tours, and I eventually ended up as tour manager, stage manager, and sometimes supporting act for all of Harry Miller's New Zealand acts, New Zealand shows. His New Zealand manager loved me, thought I was wonderful because I could do it all.
Harry, just so for people that don't know, can we just talk a little bit about what and who Harry Miller was?
Oh, Harry Miller was incredible. He actually went to school with my brother, I found out years later. But he was a promoter who would bring people over from England, from America. For example, I did 2 tours with Shirley Bassey, with Harry Miller. Oh my God, what else? One of the funny things with her, we're in Dunedin, we've got a night off. I go to the movies, I come back, her husband's coming out of the house bar in the hotel. He said, "Ralph," I said, "What?" He said, "Can you play 21 blackjack?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Come with me." So I then spent the whole night in Shirley Bassey's suite playing blackjack with her and her husband.
Fantastic.
The little things like that happen. But Harry had so many acts. And in fact, 1966, I did a week of the Rolling Stones with him. Let's
just stay in that space for a moment. So Harry's a bit of an entrepreneur, and he's lighting a fire within the industry. He's showcasing these acts from around the world, and you are on that train and moving along. It must have been a wild ride. What was your goal? Where did you want to end up when that was all starting? What was the picture you had?
Like most acts in New Zealand, we eventually moved to Australia because the audience was bigger and all the clubs in Sydney were using live acts. One would dream of going to, say, Las Vegas. And I can get onto that shortly after I do a bit more. And that was probably my dream, to perform in Vegas or in America. And then maybe get to television, who knows?
Yeah.
You know? So you just kept working and you did everything you could. Yeah. And luckily for me, I learnt to be stage manager, tour manager, and I worked in New Zealand for many years in the 70s, this was, early 60s too, for a guy called Philip Warren. Now Philip eventually became, I think, deputy mayor or something like that. But he and 2 others promoted all sorts of dances, they had dance halls, they had clubs, and this was in the days before alcohol. And then they kept them when the alcohol, they put bars in and so on. And I ran a club in Auckland for many years in the 70s called the Ace of Clubs. And the gimmick there was the show, the star of the show was a drag act by the name of Marcus Craig, who called himself Diamond Lil. Very, very funny. Part of the Diamond Lil stories I can tell, I used to write most of the shows, as well as manage the cabaret itself. And they brought a guy called Fred Dagg, who you might have heard of, John Clark. And John Clark was Fred Dagg. And he came to Auckland for 2 weeks to appear in the show. And at the time they wanted a song for him to sing. My hairdresser that used to cut my hair, I used to have hair, was a Scotsman. He gave me a cassette. He said, have a listen to this one. Ralph was a Scottish comedian just becoming famous, Billy Connolly.
Wow.
On that cassette was a song called the Welly Boot Song. I rewrote it for Fred Dagg because he wore gumboots. And I rewrote it as the Gumboot Song.
Yeah.
He recorded it and it went to #1.
That's
on the hit parade.
fantastic.
So I actually wrote the Gumboot, rewrote it. And if you see the record, it says written by W. Connolly, R. Cohen, J. Clark.
Now, that's fantastic. Now, that's the thing that I was going to ask you. So there was, in terms of a copyright, there was obviously there was a credit for both you and Billy in the preparation of that song. That's a pretty amazing thing. You've got your name right alongside one of the greats of all time.
I know, but I don't know whether Billy knows it, but yeah.
That single charted?
Yeah.
And it was a #1 or what?
Yeah. I think it went to #1, yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Did that not then, because so far already we've got a guy here, you're jumping on stage, you're writing and performing your stand-up, you're managing rooms, you're writing, you're getting your fingers now into the recording business. This must have been a wild time. What you find yourself in Australia at what point? When did you get out of New Zealand?
1969 I came to Australia for the first time. It might have been 68 actually. And I spent a month in Sydney. Now Graham Dent, funnily enough, the man who was the promoter of the very first touring show I did, was living in Sydney.
Right.
And he got me a few gigs here and there around the clubs. I then went back to New Zealand, came back in 69 and was trying to get work around the clubs.
Can I just to jump back again, because there's so much in your story, I don't want to lose the thread. When you mentioned before the Rolling Stones and Shirley Bassey, who obviously at the time would have been one of the biggest stars in the world, no doubt.
Yeah, oh yeah.
So you're in the vicinity of all this greatness. Can you just describe, for example, what's the Rolling Stones connection? How does that happen? And what year was that?
I think it was 66.
Okay, so you're still in New Zealand?
Yeah, still in New Zealand. Still doing the odd show when he brought it in for Harry Miller.
And the Stones are touring?
The Stones are touring Australia and New Zealand.
Yeah, and then how do you get involved in that?
Well, I was booked to be stage manager. And then they said, oh, you better do a 10-minute act before the Stones go on.
Right.
And I remember the Civic Theatre in Auckland. They couldn't get the town hall, it was booked. And the Civic Theatre is still there. And it originally had a dance floor way down the bottom and then 3 tiers of seating. And the stage was like a huge gondola. And it used to sink down and then they'd press a button and it would come up with a band on for the dance floors. And because of the way the place had been built, stage left was a door. And you go through that door and there was a small room, not much bigger than your office. And when the show finished, and I went up there and said, I had to go into that room with the Stones for 10 minutes because the other door, the public was going past to get out of the theatre. So I was locked in a room with them for 10 minutes.
Wow.
And I got to admit, the nicest bloke out of all of them, without upsetting the others, was the drummer.
The late Charlie Watts?
Yeah, Charlie Watts. He was a real gentleman. Mick Jagger never said a lot. How are you, Mr. Jagger?
So what was the, can you recall what you and Charlie might have been chatting about?
I wouldn't have a clue. Wouldn't have a clue.
So tell me, how does that work? You get on stage before a room full of teenagers,
Yeah.
and the Stones are peaking at this time.
Well, I'll tell you an even funnier one than that. I did a show with a guy called Paul Jones. Now, Paul Jones used to be the lead singer with a band called Manfred Mann.
Yes.
That were a hit band, right?
Do what did he?
Yep.
Yeah.
We're in Wellington. I'm stage and tour manager, but I'm not supposed to do any act on this show. I get a call. The hotel, the taxi hasn't turned up to pick Mr. Jones up. I said, oh, God, we've rung them. They're sending another one. I've got an audience, early show, full of teenagers. I walked on stage in my jeans and T-shirt, and I said, okay, Wellington, I'm going to let you know, Paul Jones' taxi hasn't turned up to pick him up. And they all went, ooh. I said, you've got two choices. You can sit there and talk to yourself till he gets there, or you can shut up and I'll tell you some jokes. Well, it went dead quiet. So I ended up doing 12, 14 minutes. And I said to the band leader, let me know as soon as Paul's here. So he did. And it went well. In fact, the reason I remember is I came off stage, and at halftime, some people came backstage. 3 of them were directors of a pirate radio station in Auckland called Radio Hauraki, which still exists, but it's no longer a pirate, of course.
Right.
I thought they'd come back to see Paul Jones and the other acts. They come straight up to me and said, we want to shake your hand. I said, why? They said, when you told those kids you were going to tell them jokes, we said he is going to get murdered. That audience is going to murder him.
Yes.
And they said, you had them in the palm of your hand. Bloody brilliant. I always remember that.
Fantastic.
So
And
that was funny.
Paul Jones, can you recall, who was that particular artist at the time? What was he doing?
Oh, he was working as a solo.
Right.
He'd left the band. He'd left Man from
Oh,
Man.
okay, got you. He's just touring
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
You've got, you're carving your own path here. Were you always fairly brave and fairly fearless? Because getting on stage like that takes a certain kind of character. And you talked earlier when we started here about your love of conversation and people. So that seems to be something that goes right back to you being a young man. But were you also fairly independent and fearless?
Well, I suppose in some ways I must have been. I wasn't scared to get out there. And I, as I said, I studied my comedy. I had so many books and records, and I'd take a joke and turn it around. But you couldn't swear. Okay, 1966, for example, an American comedian, Jewish, brilliant, called Lenny Bruce.
Of course.
You ever heard of him?
Dustin Hoffman played him, yeah? I think
Okay.
it was, yeah.
No. Lenny Bruce came to Australia, didn't come to New Zealand.
Yep.
66. He's working at Checkers nightclub in Sydney. The agent said to him, do not swear, do not use bad language. They'll boot you out of the country. Oh, no. Lenny Bruce did an act, part of his act. His whole act was brilliant. This particular part, nowadays you can say it, right? There were 6 policemen apparently standing around the back of the room. They came forward, took him off stage, and threw him out of the country.
Wow.
So he never got to do his whole act in
Yeah.
Australia. That's true.
Lenny was ahead of his time, and
Oh,
he broke the mould in terms of stand up, and he was blue, as you
Yeah.
say, but he was also, I think, a satirist as well. He was
yeah.
making political commentary
Oh, yeah.
and challenging the system.
Yeah.
And up until Lenny, not that I've got good comedy history, but up until Lenny, I think someone with that amount of attention wasn't as bold.
No,
many
couldn't.
followed in behind
Yeah.
him
Oh, yeah,
in the
yeah,
years that
yeah,
came,
yeah.
but Lenny was one of those guys that kicked down walls.
It was really, really weird.
You met him?
No, never met him.
Oh, okay, I never had the chance to meet him.
I was running a club in Auckland for Phil Warren called Mojo's, and we did shows every night there. And I got up one night and I did a gag where I used the F word on purpose.
Yeah.
And I thought, I wonder what'll happen. Well, of course, I didn't get kicked off stage. It was my club.
Yes.
About a week later, I bumped into some people, and they said, yeah, so and so. I said, what? They said, we heard all about you using the F. And I said, where'd you hear it? And they said, oh, we're in Hamilton, which was 80 miles away, coming back from somewhere. We stopped for a cup of coffee, and there was people sitting there who'd been at the show, and they said, oh, did you hear about Ralph Cohen? He said the F word on stage.
Wow.
That's how unusual it was.
Yeah, and the word got around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know.
When you left New Zealand, were you leaving at a high? Were you riding a bit of a crest of a wave
Well,
professionally?
90% of New Zealand entertainers came over to Australia. Ray Columbus and the Invaders, Dinah Lee, you name it, they all come over. And I came over in 68, and then I came back in 69. Now, here's a funny story for you too. I wanted to get on TV because it made me more valuable around the Sydney clubs, if I'd be. There was an American Jewish guy called Don Lane.
Of course.
He had his own show.
Yeah.
This is before he went to Melbourne and joined Bert Newton. This is Don Lane's show. A friend of mine had a restaurant. He said, the daughter of a friend of his knows Don Lane. He said, "We'll get her to mention your name to him." Anyway, a couple of days later, he rang me and he said, "Don Lane wants you to ring him." And the girl, no, he said, "The girl wants you to ring her." So I got hold of her. She said, "Boy, what I didn't do for you last night." And this made me laugh because in those days there was always stories about people sleeping with people to get on in show business. And she said, "Don wants you to go and see him this weekend. He's working at a club, South Sydney Juniors." I went there, went backstage, had a chat. He said, "Come to my house." Went to his house, had a long chat. He said, "The only thing I can offer you just now on TV," he said, "is an associate producer position." And I'm thinking, "Oh, okay, fine." So I started 1969 as associate producer on the Don Lane Tonight Show.
Wow.
Now I was a total of 6 months on the show, and then Sir Frank Packer gave Channel 9 to his son, whose name's going to escape me, Kerry Packer.
Kerry Packer.
And Kerry decided that all the shows had too many staff, so they put off the most recent. I was the most recent, so I got put off. But I used to write on the show, and then I became a writer. And there was 2 English writers. We'd all meet at Don's every Monday night to discuss the Thursday show. They would come up with a funny sketch. Don, being New York Jewish, would say, "What's funny about that?" And he'd turn to me, and I would translate the English humour into American humour. "Oh yeah, that's funny, we'll do that."
Yeah.
And it was so funny. And one of those guys was Rod Hull, who became famous with an emu on television on other shows.
Aussie ostrich?
Yeah. No, an emu.
An emu, I beg your pardon.
Yeah.
Of course, you just said that. Yeah. You were there in the company of greatness. We really can't underestimate the power of that juggernaut of the Don Lane show when it blew out into the 70s and Bert Newton. There was nothing bigger.
No.
And obviously we just recently lost Bert as well.
Yeah.
But I had the rare privilege of working with him for a little while on Good Morning Australia, doing infomercials live.
Great.
And I had 3 or 4 sit-downs with him. And I grew up with him doing pick-a-box and game shows. But I was always aware of the towering presence of his career.
Yeah, very brilliant man he was.
Yeah. So look, with the writing on the Don Lane show and what happens then when Kerry Packer comes on board, and what you seem to be kind of jumping around a lot and managing to rebuild yourself and redefine yourself. What do you do at that junction when they cut you out of the picture?
I was trying to do shows around the Sydney clubs at the same time. Now I think it was 69. I could get the years wrong here, but I wanted to appear at the Hilton Chevron Hotel in Sydney. They had big stars there all the time. So I was working in a club, and a guy came up to me, and he said, "Geez, you're funny." He said, "You got a manager?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Can I manage you?" And I can't remember his surname. His first name was Jim. And I said, "Sure, why?" And he said, "I got a friend of mine." He said, "Robert Goulet.
Yes.
He's coming to Australia next month. I want to see if I can get you to support him at the Chevron." And blow me down, the agent who booked the Chevron at the time, whose name's going to escape me, he gave me a one-night, one-show with Nancy Wilson, who was a brilliant black American woman singer.
Yeah.
And they said, "Okay, yep, you can do." So I got a 2-week season with Robert Goulet. I did 30 minutes and then he came on. One of the funny things I remember about him, he was a rascal. Second night, I think it was, he locked me in my dressing room. I couldn't get out to go and open the show. Anyway, that was that. And
just in that space, we can't underestimate again how big he was.
Oh no, he was huge.
And I think a contemporary of his at the time would have been Engelbert Humperdinck as well. So they were both of that ilk, weren't they?
Yeah.
And they were charting.
Yeah.
Robert Goulet was charting at the time.
Canadian, he was huge.
And filling rooms around the world. It was a different era. And you were right there in the slipstream.
Yeah. And then Jerry Lewis followed us in, so I got to meet Jerry Lewis, but I didn't work with him.
And how was that moment?
Oh, that was brilliant. I've got a photo at home of Jerry signed, to Ralph, "Nice to meet you," sort of thing. I've got a lot of those photos, different people like that.
Yeah. Who left the most lasting impression on you? It's often said, be careful you don't meet your idols. You might be disappointed. It's sometimes better just to have them in your head. Who did you meet where you kind of went, "Wow, you know what? I'm really glad I met you."
Well, I'd probably go right back to Shirley Bassey, who was one of the early ones. I can remember walking through the town halls, whatever, she's on stage, I'm walking through, I turn around to watch, and I'm still watching 10 minutes later. She was that good an act. She was absolutely brilliant voice.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. So she probably left one of the biggest impressions on me.
Yeah, fantastic.
But there's so many crazy things happen and funny stories. Tom Jones, right?
Yes.
Yes, he's sitting right beside me here. Look.
Yes.
I never worked with him.
Well, so we should explain, when you say sitting right beside you, we're looking at a photograph of me next to Tom. I had a small appearance on a variety show on television back in the late.
And may I say,
90s.
you look a lot younger there.
Thank you for the compliment.
So
and Tom was in the dressing room next door. He passed by. We had 30 seconds to chat. So
I'll
Tom
give
Jones.
you a funny Tom Jones story.
Let's hear it.
I think it was 1964-ish. Tom Jones was appearing in a show touring New Zealand. He was the opening act. He wasn't the star.
Right.
After the show, the New Zealand guy called Lou Prime, who was the MC, had a party at his place. And he said, make sure you pop over, blah, 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 blah. I was MCing at a little jazz club in Auckland called the Montmartre. 2 shows a night. I think it was Friday or Saturday. After the first show, I came out, went downstairs to get in my car. Halfway down the stairs, 2 women said, "G'day, Ralph." They were friends of mine. They were hostesses for Air New Zealand. In those days, it was called NAC, National Airways Corporation. They lived in Christchurch. I'd met them there when I went down to run a dance hall. I said, "What are you doing?" They said, "Oh, we're going to come up to watch the next show." I said, "Come with me, come with me." I went out, we got in my car. They said, "Where are we going?" I said, "You'll see." And I had a Triumph Herald Coupe. It was a 2-seater car with a little dicky seat on the back. Yeah. This is important. We get over to Lou's place. We go in. I said, "Now, girls, I've got to be back at the Montmartre to do a 1 o'clock show. So 1:45, I'll be leaving here." Off they went. I get in there, Lou walks around. "Oh, Ralph, come and meet Tom Jones." "How do you do, Mr. Jones?" "Hello, nice to meet you."
That's not bad.
Anyway, I never thought any more. 1:45, oh shit, I better get back to town. Yeah. I get a tap on the shoulder. I turn around, it's Tom Jones. He's, "Ralph." I said, "Yes, Mr. Jones." He said, "My manager and I, Gordon Mills, can we come with you and the girls back to the club because they're all too young here for me, they're all kids." I said, "Well, you can, but you've got to squeeze into my car." Now imagine this, there's me, 2 women, Tom Jones, Gordon Mills, squeezed into a 2-seater car. We get back to town, go upstairs, do the show, have fun, da-da-da. I go home. He stayed there till about 4 a.m. I heard. Now we go forward. 1969 in Sydney.
Yes.
The Mandarin Club.
Yes.
Every Sunday night, all the entertainers would go there for a dinner or a drink, or sometimes they were working. I'm sitting there at a table with a Jewish entertainer from Israel called Ralph Cohen. He was huge in Israel, never heard of in Australia. I go to the toilet, I come back, I said, "Ralph." He said, "What?" I said, "Behind me." And he looked like this. I said, "Yeah." I said, "Is that Tom Jones?" He said, "I think it is." And then the guy spoke in a Welsh accent. I said, "Watch this." I turned around, I said, "Mr. Jones." He said, "Yes." I said, "You probably don't remember me." He said, "I'm sorry, I don't." I said, 1966, New Zealand. "Oh," he said, "you had the Triumph Herald Coupe."
Fantastic. That's fantastic.
Okay. Now we go forward again to about 1980 something.
Right.
We're in Gold Coast.
Yeah.
I'm working in a restaurant called the River Inn Seafood Restaurant. Next door is Danny's Restaurant. Sunday night, Tom Jones is appearing down at Twin Towns. Sunday night, after he'd done his show, he comes walking through the area and goes into Danny's. And then his manager comes and sees me and says, "Oh, Mr. Jones said he'd like to have dinner here tomorrow night. Is that all right? Can you stay open?" I said, "Yeah, I'll do that." So he turned up for dinner the next night, and I said to him again, "You still probably don't remember me."
That's fantastic.
But that's the only, it killed me that he remembered.
Did he remember you on the next time?
No,
oh, that's great, because as the years are going by,
my God,
he's forgetting more and more.
14 years, you know.
But did you recount the story?
Yeah.
How did he react?
Well, he just said, he said, "I think vaguely, Ralph, but there were so many things have happened in the world." Well, remember, he'd been in Vegas, him and Elvis.
Him and Elvis, yeah, they were tight. That's incredible.
That's very funny, isn't it? Huh?
Yeah, that's incredible. You packed so much in, and it seems like your life in hospitality seems to be a constant. You were sort of moving in and out of that hospitality realm as well, which obviously helped carry you through. I was curious just to jump around a little bit here again, because your life is so big. I saw in a list of notes that I had before we sat down that you had a list of people that we could spend another hour or so just going through to get those stories. I saw Johnny O'Keefe in there. Do you have a memory of Johnny?
Only a very small one. He came to New Zealand.
Yeah.
This was before I ever came to Australia. And I introduced him at a pub type place on the north shore of Auckland. The woman who ran its name was Barbara, I remember that. And I just introduced him on stage and watched him. But that was a similar time to New Zealand had a star called Johnny Devlin.
Yes, they did. Johnny Devlin, with his band at the time, name escapes me, they opened for the Beatles in the Australian tour, New Zealand tour of '64.
Right, here's a true story. The Australian agent, whose name I forget, went to England and booked the Beatles. And he said, no, I'm sorry. He went to England with a show, booked a show, and he said, I need a band to back Johnny Devlin. And the agent in England, this was 1963, the agent in England said, have a look at these guys. They're from Liverpool. They called the Beatles. They're doing a lot of work in Germany. They're very popular. He said, okay, I'll book them for about $2,000 for a week.
This is a true story.
This is a true story.
It is, I know the story. It's
They
good.
were booked to back Johnny
They
Devlin.
were booked cheap.
Yeah, cheap.
Yeah.
And their manager, Brian Epstein, kept the deal a year later. He could have just paid it off.
Yes, but we should mention by this time they've broken.
Oh, they're the biggest stars in the world.
And the biggest stars in the world.
Yeah.
But they've got this agreement and this contract to play
for $2,000 a week or
yeah,
whatever it was.
and to come to Australia and New Zealand for this
right.
on a budget.
Yep.
And they honour it.
Yeah.
And it's the biggest act in the world.
Oh, incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Now, they didn't actually then open for Devlin. They flipped that,
Oh,
right?
No. Johnny Devlin used to be originally managed by Philip Warren, the bloke I mentioned earlier.
Yes.
And he said to me, I was working with him at the Ace of Clubs, and he said, we're going down to see Johnny Devlin at the hotel. Me and him walked down there. We're in his room. Phil said, I forgot to do some stuff that I wanted to give to John. Ralph, it's on my desk. Can you go back and get it? So I had to walk back up to the office and back down, about 15 minutes all up. I get back, Phil Warren says, you should have been quicker. I said, why? He said, Paul and John were in here for 10 minutes having a chat.
Come on.
I never met the Beatles. But I did go to their show at the Auckland Town Hall, and I was in the choir seats on stage, and I could lean out like that and touch Ringo on the shoulder. That's how close I was.
That's incredible.
Oh, yeah.
Do you have a memory of what that was like? You're right there behind the shoulders of Ringo?
The moment the Beatles came on stage, the screaming started.
Was it as loud as I've read and heard that you couldn't hear anything?
Yeah. I'm sitting right behind Ringo, and I could not hear. I could hear the music, but I couldn't make out always what they were singing or playing. That's how loud the screaming was.
And you were
in
that
the
close?
Auckland Town Hall, yeah.
You're as close as what the experience must have been like for them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we're in the era where there's not a whole lot of foldback and there's not a lot of great tech on PA systems.
That's right.
Ringo talks about how he would watch the three of them in the lineup to find where he was in the song.
The song, yeah.
And he talked about, John would sort of have his legs apart and he would be bopping, and he said, I knew when Paul did the woo, whatever.
Yeah.
Oh, we're there.
Yeah.
And he said that was how I held the backbeat, by watching their heads, because I couldn't hear them.
No, you couldn't hear
And
a
I've often
bloody thing.
thought, how is it you can't hear them? But you were right there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, there were speakers on the stage facing it backwards and frontwards, but the audience was so loud.
Yeah, that's incredible.
screaming,
I read
incredible.
once that it was like a jet engine starting up, and that you were standing behind the sound of a jet engine and trying to play music into it.
That's right.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Can we just go back to where you were? You're you're coming into the 70s and the 80s. You're Gold Coast based. You never went back to New Zealand?
Oh, I go back every year, but I moved to the Gold Coast 1980. I'd only ever been here once before when I was living in Sydney in 69, 70. I went from Sydney to Adelaide. And in Adelaide, I was running a drag club for a very famous Jewish gangster, I suppose, Abe Saffron.
Of course.
Right? He was, I worked for him, and his partner in Adelaide running a drag club. And then while I'm there, I got to appear on the Barry Ion, I-O-N show, which was a Tonight Show at Channel 7. And I did about 3 months on that show in Adelaide. And in that era, I had a weekend on the Gold Coast visiting a friend. So anyway, I came back to the Gold Coast 1980, and I was doing some shows here and in Brisbane. I worked the Broadbeach pub that used to exist in those days. I think about 2 shows there. Each one was about 3 or 4 weeks long. Lovelace Watkins, I can't remember the other act. And I also was in food and beverage, the River and Seafood Restaurant, etc., etc. And I've been living here basically ever since. But I go back to New Zealand regularly. One of the first trips back was to make a commercial for Smith's Chips on television over there. I remember that. Most of the time when I went back was just to visit family and friends. Right. Once I got married, my wife's a Kiwi as well, we'd be visiting all her family. She's got brothers and sisters. Yeah. And we still go back when we can.
From a career perspective, was there a point in the journey from the life and entertainment where you decided, I'm going to put my focus now more into hospitality, more into food and beverage, or have you always just walked that line and let fate take you where it takes you?
Yeah, more or less. This is 2022, isn't it? I had an email about 6 or 8 weeks ago, this is true story, from an agent in Brisbane that used to book me in the 80s and 90s. I never heard from him for 15, 20 years. And I got an email saying, I've got a client wants a stand-up comic to do a gig on Saturday. I sent one back saying, I'm very, very thrilled that you even remembered I exist, but I'm not really working anymore. Thank you very much.
That's great.
Rather than go up and make a fool of myself. You know. But he used to book me in clubs and pubs in Brisbane and stuff. Yeah. And I was still doing, and on the Gold Coast as well as doing comedy, I was in the restaurant trade. I managed restaurants. I became secretary of the Restaurant and Caterers Association here. I did their annual functions. One of the first ones I ever did was at SeaWorld in the 80s, and it was one of the first outside things that SeaWorld had ever done. We did it in a huge marquee, and I actually appeared in the arena with the dolphins.
Wow.
No, sea lions, sorry.
Well,
sea
I
lions.
emceed a Restaurant and Caterers an award night with Rob Borbidge in the Sea Lion Theatre in the 90s. And you may have been on the board at that time.
I can't even remember. I remember. I knew Rob Borbidge very well.
Yeah, and I emceed
long time. In fact, I bought one of his cars.
Is that a fact? Well, we had a sea lion swim across the pool with a tube that was sealed in its mouth. Yes,
exactly.
I was the MC that night. And it swum out of the pool, and it had the tube in its mouth, and I had to call Rob, who was the premier or the
could have been premier
or opposition leader, I can't recall. Anyway, he comes down, and I had to hand him the tube. He would unscrew it and announce the winner. But of course, it had sealed tight. Excuse the pun. We couldn't open it. And the photos in the bulletin the next day were of him and I pulling on this tube with a sea lion in the background. We eventually got it open, and I'm improvising my backside off to fill the air. And that's how I remember the fact it was a Restaurant and Caterers Awards evening at SeaWorld. So you may have been there.
That is exactly what we did.
Yes.
It was one of the very first events SeaWorld did. And I had to wait for the sea lion to swim over with the tube in his mouth.
Well, there you go.
The second one that come over, got out, looked at me and jumped back in the water and went back.
Yes. Well, I would have worked that night. That was in the era of David Howell, Carol Podesta.
David Howell, yes.
They were all part of that team. I know we're getting into baseball now. We're getting into the weeds a bit.
And the guy that was actually food and beverage director of SeaWorld at the time was David Howell's boss, Charlie Halstead.
Yeah, that's right.
You remember him?
I do remember him well. So you've obviously had this passion for food that's travelled through your life and the entertainment. When you look back at the journey, I know you came with a list, and I don't want to finish without touching on some of it. Yeah. If we were just to touch on some, is there anything here? I can see you've got some sheets of paper there. Is there anything here that we haven't touched that we should make a bit of time on as we get down the home stretch?
Well, 1979, I went to England for 2 weeks, and then America for a week. A lot of different acts in England. When I was in New Zealand, Philip Warren had about 7 places in Auckland, and one he took over was on the North Shore, and it was a perfect cabaret room. And we used to bring acts from all over the world to work it, and I would always introduce them. I was the manager as well as stand-up comic. I'm trying to think of some of them. Anyway, one of them was an English comedian called Frankie Howard.
Of course.
And Frankie Howard got up on stage, done his act, and then came off, and he said to me, "Ralph, why didn't they laugh at this? Why didn't they laugh?" I said, "Because you're using English trade names and stuff." He said, "What am I going to do?" I said, "Leave it with me." So I got home that night, and I had a recording of him, and I listened to it and rewrote it all and gave it to him the next day.
Incredible.
Using New Zealand or Australian
and localising
products and whatever.
Yeah.
He got up, he did the act, brought the house down. So that was that. And I just mentioned that because I could talk about London shortly.
Yeah.
And another great act that I put on stage, I actually booked it. I got a phone call at 4 a.m. at my house. "Ralph, here, this is so-and-so in Las Vegas, an agent." "Yeah, Ray Charles and the band are going to Jakarta.
Come on.
We can stop in Auckland for a couple of nights and give you a night at your North Shore Club. 10,000 US, take it or leave it." And I had to answer. Phil Warren, who the boss, was away at the time. I said, "Okay, we'll take it." So later in the morning, when it's 9 o'clock, I ring the two directors in Wellington. "Ray Charles, I got him for 10 grand for 2 shows. One of them says, 'Who's Ray Charles?'
Wow.
The other one says, 'Oh, that's incredible. I'll make sure I'm there for that.'" Phil got back from overseas. I told him, well, he was so rapt. Now, one night, 2 shows. We never put an ad in the paper. We sent invitations to a whole lot of people, business people. And it was, I can't remember what we charged, but in the day it was quite expensive. Dinner and show, Ray Charles, 2 shows. We sold out both shows.
Amazing.
And I can remember seeing Phil Warren sitting on stage on the piano stool beside Ray Charles. And of course I met him, so that was really wonderful.
Amazing, yeah.
Really, really wonderful. And now I've forgotten where I was going.
I'm going to hold you in that space.
London.
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 You might be telling the story I wanted to ask about.
79. I'm in London. There's a brilliant New Zealand entertainer. He's dead now, unfortunately, Ricky May.
Of course, he was an icon.
Yeah. I knew Ricky from when we were both kids, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Ricky's working in London. I ring him up. He says, "I'll come and pick you up, take you to work with me." He was working at a club in Soho. I can't remember the name of the club. 90% of the audience were Arabs. And I was in the audience this night. It was a restaurant, cabaret. Here's Ricky May on stage in London singing Pokari Kariana in Maori and getting all these Arabs to sing along with him. It was so funny.
Yeah.
After the show, "Come on, Ralph, we'll get in the car. We're going to go to Ronnie Scott's, very famous jazz club in London." Mm-hmm. Huge queue outside Ronnie Scott's. We pull up in this manager's Rolls Royce. Ricky gets out, I get out, the manager gets out. The doorman says, "Mr. May, nice to see you. Come this way." We go straight in. We walk in. There's like a balcony type area. A guy comes walking out of the back with a table on his head, plonks it down on the balcony, puts chairs around it, sitting there. 5 minutes later, on stage, very famous American trumpet player called Dizzy Gillespie.
Of course.
Beautiful. We watched the whole show. The show finishes. We're in there eating and drinking. Waiter comes over, puts a chair between me and Ricky. Yeah. Like, what's going on here? 5 minutes later, Dizzy Gillespie comes out and sits in the chair. "Ricky, how are you, mate? Good to see you." He knew everybody.
Yeah.
He knew everybody. Brilliant entertainer.
Isn't that
Ricky,
wonderful?
Mate. I loved him.
Look, he was obviously a very special guy. I remember as a kid seeing him on the midday show. Yeah. He was a regular on Australian television for years. Just a beautiful voice. I saw on a list of people in your journey that you bumped into and or had an experience with, and I had to ask about Pete Townsend, Roger Daltrey, The Who,
yeah.
Keith Moon. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
What I can remember mostly about The Who is that when we were in Wellington, we had a night off, and it was somebody's birthday. So they rented a little coffee shop nightclub, and in the 60s there wasn't many places that could have booze. This one didn't. And I can seem to remember them getting very drunk and breaking some stuff in. And I think one of them threw a TV set out the window in his hotel room. But I mean, they were a good act.
Crazy.
The Animals.
Eric Burden. Chaz Chandler.
The best man, the best white man I've ever heard sing blues, Eric Burden.
Yeah, okay.
Yep, never heard a white fella sing the blues as good as he could.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
Still touring too, the last time I checked.
Yes, I believe, yes.
Still on the road after all these years.
Yes, I believe that.
Now, before we get to the final moments, anything in that list that we should touch before we wrap up?
Yeah, another quick funny story.
Yes, let's do that.
79,
Yes.
I was in London, then I went to Los Angeles.
Yeah.
This is a true story. I got a cab one day in Los Angeles from my hotel to wherever I was going. It might have been Disneyland or something. There's a young black guy driving the cab. We're talking. Where are you from? I said, New Zealand. Never heard of it. I said, cross the road from Australia. Oh, what do you do? Entertainment, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So he drove me out there. I paid him. That was it. Wouldn't expect to ever hear again, right? I get back to New Zealand about 2 months later. I'm at a party. Some guys come walking up to me at the party. They were disc jockeys on one of the radio stations. Ralphie, how are you? I said, good, mate. He said, Jesus, you're everywhere. I said, what are you talking about? They said, last week we were in Los Angeles at a DJ convention. I said, yeah. And he says, we get into a taxi to go to a hotel. I said, yeah. And he said, the cab driver says, where are you from? And we said, New Zealand. He said, oh, do you know Ralph Cohen?
That's hilarious.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
Oh, I just couldn't believe that.
That's hilarious.
Couldn't believe
it's
it.
It's a small world.
It's a very small world.
Yeah.
1980, I think it might have been 79, I went to live in Hawaii for a few months. I couldn't get a green card though.
Yeah.
And that taxi driver phoned me in Hawaii at the agent that I was working for there.
Phoned you for what reason?
Well, he had a band. He wanted to know if he could get the work for the band in Honolulu.
Yeah, yeah.
So I had him send me photos and stuff like that. But how incredible.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
Look, it's been an incredible time, mate. And if we had more time, we could really open it up. But what a life it's been. When you look back, and you mentioned before one person that had a real impact on you that in terms of meeting some of those superstars was Shirley Bassey. Do you have a moment as a performer that you feel really proud of? I'm sure there's many, you know, the single and the writing and the touring around. Is there a moment that sticks in your head where you look back and go, that's one of the great moments of my professional entertainment life?
Without being able to think for too long, I have to go back to that time that Paul Jones never got to the town hall on time. I'm wearing jeans, I'm wearing a t-shirt, I'm not dressed in a suit like I used to dress when I performed, and I walk out in front of a room full of teenagers and manage to entertain them for 10 or 15 minutes. That I always remember.
Yeah.
I remember meeting an American comedian called Shelley Berman, who was huge around the world at the time. That for me was a great thrill.
Yeah.
I had a lot of good times with Don Lane on the Don Lane show for the 6 months I worked with him.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of occasions that I think look back on fondly. No one that stands out in particular.
And isn't that the point of living a good, long life, is to pack in all of that you can?
I guess it really is, and I'm surprised I'm still here. I'm happy I am.
Yeah.
I don't know how long I'll continue working. My hobby now, I suppose, is playing golf.
Yeah.
Not very well, but at least I play, and I enjoy
heard you
it.
played on the weekend and almost hit a ball in one.
Nearly.
Come on, it's a little bit of
Nearly
golf
hit a
humour. A
ball
little
in
bit of
one.
golf humour. How's my delivery?
Your delivery was unexpected.
It's very kind of you.
That's all right. I don't need to be nice anymore.
No, you don't. I think you get to an age where you don't have to be nice to anyone if you don't want to.
That's right, except my wife.
Right.
I've got to be nice to my wife. Yeah.
It's been an incredible life, mate, and I think one of the themes in your life, even if it's unconscious, I think one of the themes of your life is fearlessness, because a lot of people will talk about all the things they're going to do and won't necessarily back themselves to do it. You know, here you were with a love of comedy and a passion for stand-up, and you backed yourself and went out there and built a life. And I'm curious now, what I know you say you don't know when retirement might be, but what is the simple joy that keeps you coming in and doing theme parks? What's the joy in that now?
Well, the biggest joy, thank God I don't need the money, it's handy.
Good, because I was going to ask you if you could spot me. I'm going through
no
a
worries,
bit of a
not
tough
a problem.
time. We can
Not
talk
a problem.
off
I'll get
mic.
you lunch after.
Thank you, that'd be great.
Yeah, if you can find me. The biggest joy is communication with people, making people smile or laugh.
Yes.
Even little babies.
Yes.
I wave my hand or make a funny face and they smile and I feel good. But that's always been very important to me, because when people are laughing, it's going to sound weird, when people are laughing they're not fighting and dropping bombs.
Yes.
The this nonsense going on at present with Russia and Ukraine,
Yes.
I feel awful, but there's nothing I can do about it.
No.
Who knows? It's such a strange, wonderful world now. Some things are great. The 2 years we've just had this bloody virus.
Yes.
How crazy is that?
I know. But I think one of the things you just touched on there is absolutely true. That this business that we're in, and we have this mantra amongst our team within the show and entertainment division, that our job is to keep people in their bodies feeling something and keeping them having an emotional experience. Don't let them go to their heads and
Exactly.
ask questions and think
Yeah.
critically.
Yeah.
And let them come into a place where they can just feel.
Yeah.
And keep those feelings about positive energy.
Exactly.
And-
Never mind why. Just do it.
Just do it and just feel something.
Yeah.
But the fact that you still have that same light burning as bright in you as we can clearly hear when we talk to you and listen to you speak is a wonderful thing, mate. It's all energy, and you still have wonderful energy coming out. And I'm sure that's one of the reasons it comes back at you too.
Well,
Mate,
I'd like to think so. I put it all down to my wife, Christine. She's incredible. She looks after me like you wouldn't believe. And we've had a very good life together now for 30-something years.
is it 30 plus years of marriage, is it?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
wonderful. Can I ask you before we wrap up, where did you meet?
Oh, well, we met in Auckland.
Yeah.
I was running clubs and she was waitressing.
Right.
She was originally a nurse, fully qualified nurse.
Yeah.
So we first met in Auckland a long time ago.
And she's been alongside you on this roller coaster of a journey.
Oh, well, for 30-something years, yeah.
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 And does she put up with your jokes?
Well, I don't know whether she understands them all, but she pretends to laugh like you do, which is really wonderful.
That's an act of love.
Oh, thank you.
Mate, thanks for sitting down. It's been terrific to get some of your journey in just under an hour. So we've captured a bit of a snapshot, and your energy here in the park is something that's well recognised.
Oh, I'll tell you, while you're talking about the park, I was employee of the month
Yes.
for February.
You were?
Yes,
There you go.
in the department that I'm in.
So that's nice to be
I
recognised,
know,
right?
and it's only been 19 years till I got it.
Well, it's nice to be eventually recognised.
Eventually, yeah, it is.
Mate, all the best. Thank you for sitting down. It's
Michael, thank you for talking.
been an honour to talk to you.
Thank you, sir.
Cheers. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the experience, please be sure to subscribe and comment. It all helps in raising the Park Life podcast profile. Wherever you are in the world, keep well and catch you next time.